Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This Is the Year, the Swiss-based AI engineering podcast. And in today's episode, we are breaking down again several topics for you guys. First of all, we have some OpenAI news. They have a recent partnership announced. We'll dig into that. Then we also talk about the ability by Claude to actually generate complex files. We actually do that also for our agentic system, so we are reasoning a little bit through that. And also we have a finance corner at the end where we deep dive into the latest and the most recent news around AI and stocks. With me today, once again, is João from Lisbon. How is life, my friend? Good to see you for yet another podcast episode.
Life is good. I mean, it's even better for OpenAI. That's just booming these days, making partnerships with every single company. I think we got dive a little bit on why they chose Nokia, but we'll leave it for the end of the episode. And so I've been seeing, I'm not sure if you've been seeing too, on LinkedIn and on Reddit, and I think maybe it'll come to Twitter, maybe it won't. It's a very niche thing. People posting the plaques they got from OpenAI. Have you seen them?
I have, based on your suggestion, I was looking it up. But since we're a hardcore Claude user, I'm not too much into the OpenAI game. So give me an update. What's happening on the apparent fake YouTube plugs here?
So I'm not sure. I don't think YouTube still does it like the silver, gold, and like platinum buttons for like the amount of subscribers. OpenAI decided it was a very good idea to replicate that, and they sent out these plaques. I think they're like decently made, but they're not anything fancy
it's like
or
made of
special.
glass. I'll put it on the screen. It's actually looking pretty okay.
And it's saying, hey, congratulations for processing like 10 billion tokens. For those who are not super technical on this podcast, tokens is how you measure like words in the LLM world. So it's not one token, one word, but it's usually 1 to 4 tokens per word. And so 10 billion tokens is quite a bunch of text that they send out to LLMs. That's some text that they also got from the LLMs. We ran some calculations on how much this would cost. I mean, ran the calculations both with the current API prices for OpenAI, but probably if you got to 10 billion tokens, you didn't get them using only the latest model. You also got them from GPT-4, GPT-4 Turbo. Maybe you started back then in GPT 3.5. So this would net you something between like 60K, the minimum, to upwards of 120 to 200K dollars, so $200,000, which to me is not that high, especially for an enterprise setting. For enterprise setting, it's not that high, and thus I come to my final conclusion. There are just too many plaques out there. I saw companies and I saw people posting their plaques. Some people had their own names on it. Some people had their own startup names on the plaques, and there were just so many, which means the plaques are not that special. They're just trying to get you hooked. But if you go online and you see that everyone else has them, then they're really not that special. I mean, they could have run a query on database saying how many people have actually like surpassed 10 billion tokens. And if the answer is above like 5,000 people, maybe choose a higher number. Maybe choose 50 billion, maybe 100 billion, to make it somewhat special, you know? Back in YouTube days, like it was a thing to get a button because not everyone had them. But that's like my small little rant to introduce all the OpenAI topics.
I mean, on YouTube, it's really difficult. You need to have 100,000 subscribers. And in the world of artificial intelligence, as now OpenAI just probably funnily introduced it, you can also use a cheaper model, like maybe a very old one, and just run some tokens on these old models, and you might actually yield it maybe for even cheaper. Just for context, you mentioned it before, if you're completely new to the AI world, these tokens, once again, these are split up words. You would, generally speaking, train a large language models not by words itself or by general just blocks of text. You would tokenize it. There's different types of tokenizers that you can actually be using. And then each of these words, sometimes even numbers, are split into tokens. And then the language and maybe the atoms of a large language model are actually these tokens. And then when you spit it back out, the tokens yield a probability distribution. And then that is decoded again to be a text. And that's exactly what you see in a chatbot or any other large language model. So that's a little bit the world of tokens. The world of tokens is actually the new economy probably as well. All these data centers, all these AI factories that we're going to talk about in a second that NVIDIA introduced once again at their GTC conference. It's really all about these tokens. It's how many dollars you have to actually spend to yield output tokens and also how much you have to pay for token input. So that's a little bit the tokenomics around these plaques. Again, it's just a funny side note probably by OpenAI that once again, when you actually process a lot of these tokens, meaning input and output tokens, given a particular price for a particular model running in a cloud, you are awarded one of these plaques, similarly to YouTube. Thank you, Joel, for bringing that up. I thought it's a funny side note. We will probably never get one of these as we are predominantly using the cloud setup.
Yeah, we're not OpenAI people.
We're
not
not OpenAI
against their
people,
models.
yeah.
I mean, they're decent enough, but for business, for our current projects, cloud has been the best model. Of course, we always keep testing them and comparing them. If OpenAI ever surpasses them, we'll let you know. We're also keeping a close eye, a close look on the open source models out there. And we also have some news, I think expected updates regarding how these open source models are operating. Do you want to introduce the theme or should I?
No, all good. I have just one more maybe left note for OpenAI before maybe talk about open source. It's the announcement of the PayPal instant checkout feature within OpenAI or the ChatGPT lineup. I think it's a fairly unique partnership. Maybe we can put it on the screen as well. Just bottleneck is basically once we actually have a pretty good integration of instant checkout capabilities, meaning you can actually pay within ChatGPT, it opens a broad array of use cases, for example, for e-commerce, for online booking, for your holidays or for your flights. Because so far this was mostly just being searched by OpenAI, tool calling on, for example, a database for flights or a database like booking.com. But now with the partnership of PayPal, again, the stock jumped also a little bit surprisingly, is again the ability for you to actually check out within the OpenAI user interface. I think it's a unique partnership. Probably see a lot more. PayPal has around 400 million active users for this payment platform. It's one of the biggest in the world, if not the biggest. OpenAI has probably close to 2 billion active users now. So this is a truly unique synergistic partnership. I'm truly excited to also see again some new feature that you can actually pay stuff directly on ChatGPT. As you know, and you're probably a better expert technically, if it's around finance within an AI system, it needs to be super secure. So let's see how they do it. But just simply the partnership, I think, is actually pretty unique. So sure, let's talk about open source. You teased it already. What's on the roster on these open source models? What's maybe new? Worth mentioning here.
So we've been super happy about having open source models and getting these open source models is totally free that you can deploy on your computer or deploy in your cloud in a safe manner. We're getting closer and closer to being the frontier models. So usually there was a gap between the top OpenAI models, the top Claude models, compared to whatever you can get for free from Queen, from the GLM, the Kimi models, and you could see that gap by each release. So every couple of weeks, the gap was getting shorter. And these open source models are getting better and better. And it made sense, and we talked about it when Meta had the Llama models, and they still are working on it. We haven't had a release for a while. They said that when they got, if a Llama model would be as good as one of the top frontier models, they would not release it as open source. They would make you pay for it, like OpenAI makes you pay for GPT, like Anthropic makes you pay for Claude. Which was very reasonable. I mean, there are business after all. It's very expensive to train these models. And so you always had this like hope of getting better and better models, but also you knew that they would close them eventually. Well, we hadn't have news from Llama, but we had news from Queen. They have been like one of the top players in open source for the past few months. Every time you search for open source models, open source LLMs online, you'd see the Queen models, usually on the top 5 or top 3. They've been consistently good. They're launching different LLMs for video, different LLMs for text, different LLMs for doing OCR on models, for interpreting different languages. So they have all these like array of models for use cases. And now they have this lineup that they'll be updating called the Max. So the Queen 3 Max. Queen 3 was the latest lineup. Queen 3 Max is not an open source model. So all the other ones are, but this one specifically is only available through API. It's available through a bunch of different providers, but you have to pay for it. And so it's not as much about Queen itself. I think this will be the general rule for all open source models for all the companies doing them, which is you're going to get the light to medium models for free, for open source. You can deploy them and they will keep getting better, hopefully. But the top models from these companies will start being closed source. It's sad for the academic world. Business-wise, it's very minor. If you own a business, if you plan to use these models in your product, it's nothing you have to concern yourself about, because you would already be deploying these models somewhere else. You'd already be running the inference on a different provider, and you'll keep doing that. The providers will still be providing these models. It's just you or yourself won't be able to have the weights of these models. It's a sad thing to see for the research part of things. I think we might have a slight slowdown of new competitors in the game. But other than that, very expected, because then again, running these LLMs is immensely expensive. And I think we'll get onto that, and all the different infrastructure and all different components that are needed, and the economy of this running an LLM back in our finance corner. I think, Cyril, we're doing it at the end, aren't we?
Yeah, we have a little bit of of an add-on prepared at the end, but I think maybe just my best read on these open source models. Once again, there's so many different models out there, and at the end of the day, if you're not fully frontier, because if you are fully frontier, why would you just plug it in for free basically and just fully open source it?
Because you're a nice person, Cyril. You share nice your open source model.
I just never. Since I'm not like that, I'm a believer in open source for particular domains. I just don't think the economics around an open source large language model, for now at least, made a lot of sense. Maybe that will change into the future. Since you have all these large players, again, Claude focusing on B2B, OpenAI on B2C, Gemini also maybe for both use cases. And then you have a vast array of open source models for particular, maybe niche use cases. You can use them as well, maybe mostly for the scientific world, and some niche use cases for example, legal or anything else. You might use open source, or you actually can combine them, again, using a multi-agent system with different types of LLMs. The frontier intelligence, maybe your core analysis agent is running, for example, on Claude Sonnet 4.5. You might have an open source model that's running the embedding, or that's running some validation, or that's running some other features as well. So that's maybe the mix. Once again, I would probably not count it completely out. It might actually make sense if you have multi-agent setup to use open source if you run it in your local AWS instance and you're able to do that. Maybe let's move on to maybe the next topic. We've been iteratively deploying that here on the podcast, which is the capability of Claude, generally speaking, now more and more to generate files. This was a news that has been announced a few weeks ago already, but there's more and more talk on the capability of, again, Claude coding. And if Claude is able to code, it can also code files like, for example, an Excel file or a Word document. Since we are more or less analyzing and actively building on these particular features exactly, I just thought it makes sense to maybe just open the hood a little bit also for maybe from your context, Joao, like what's the reasoning behind why it now is the time to use Claude for these particular use cases? Is Claude good enough to actually model? And maybe I have some sort of caveat also in terms of pricing, but why don't we start it off maybe just technically, Joao, some high-level notions on what is Claude actually doing and why is that stuff actually yielding an Excel spreadsheet out of it?
So I think Anthropic didn't even plan this out when it started, but they've been focusing a lot on the ability to code. The Claude models have been consistently at least in the top 3 for the last year or so, in the top 3 coding agents. And I don't know who, maybe they had this idea for a while, but if you give Claude the ability to code in a somewhat safe environment, it can code an Excel from scratch. So you can use Python packages. Usually it's Python because it's an easy enough programming language to run on. It's not super verbose, so you can program things without spending too much output tokens. And you can just create the Excel programmatically using a Python package, and you won't see the cells like you and I see. You probably won't care much about the colors in those cells, but it'll be able to write some functions, fill up those cells, add some formulas to the Excel, and basically create you a model, or at least interact with your Excel. Because one way, and I think at least the first stage that we've been seeing, is the capability of these models to give you an Excel from scratch. You can download it, you can open it on your computer, and it is a valid Excel. Maybe it has a few tables, maybe it has a few sheets. However, the stage 2 of this is you having that initial Excel or your own Excel that you've been building on for a while, and the ability for Claude to open it up, again, programmatically, change a few cells, read what's in them, understand what's the context of those cells, and help you update that Excel. I mean, I was never a big fan of Excel. I think it's tremendously useful, also tremendously boring to jump around between tables, doing the formulas, clicking the wrong cell, and then the formula says error somewhere. Having a model do that for you, having a model do that consistently and do it in a safe way for you, I think unlocks a lot of free time, at least mental capacity. And so stage 2 will be the ability for Claude to interact with your Excel, edit it. And stage 3, still yet to be seen, is actually making this Excel to your liking in the way that's comparable to analysts these days. I think you'll see a lot of trailers for startups presenting these features. I would say to test them out and see how good they are, because it is the future. I think that we will have Excel done by AI, but it is not as straightforward. There's a lot of ways that it can go wrong. There's a lot of possible hallucinations. An error in the code, and it might mean that the Excel doesn't compile or doesn't have a valid file. So test them out, see if they work, and if they do, amazing. Invest in those startups.
Exactly. I mean, it's a good notion on the levels. I believe probably in 12 to 18 months, we will have fully capable AI agents creating these Excel spreadsheets. Now I think we're probably on stage 2. Early stage 3s are possible technically. Once you can actually have the ability to iterate on ongoing Excel spreadsheets like you would do, for example, manually. I think that's really where the power of agentic AI is really coming down. There's two more caveats. First of all, is the security, because if you do use the Claude user interface to generate basic Excels, it's not running securely on any instance. You would want to trust it with your data. So that's the first one. You need to have a proprietary setup. Also, you need to ideally link it to different types of data sources, like, for example, deals or any risk analysis you actually had in mind to then build the Excel model. That's the second component. And then the third component is the pricing. As we told before, we talked quickly about the tokens. So generally speaking, if you create an Excel file, it takes certain inputs. Let's assume that's like 10% or maybe 20% of the actual token load. So the Excel AI agent basically takes that input coming from the deals, coming from other data sources, and then the generation of the Excel spreadsheet is roughly a 15 to 20 minute reasoning step by Claude for Sonnet, 4.5 Sonnet, and that is around 80 to 90% of the tokens. If you actually compute that just back on the envelope mathematics, it roughly takes, again, taking into account the user might take 4 to 5 iterations back and forth, it's roughly $5 per Excel spreadsheet. That's more or less what you can assume. Maybe it's sometimes $2, maybe it's $3, maybe sometimes it's $7 or $10 if it's a very long reasoning step, and the Excel creation maybe takes 45 minutes. And that's usually the back of the envelope mathematics you can think about, especially if you have a capability in place for your agentic AI system that many users, for example, 10, 15, 20 users per institute, are actually running these Excels like 24/7 almost. You actually need to price your enterprise SaaS in a particular way, not to burn through your bedrock cost on AWS, for example. That's really a bit of consideration as well. I sum it up. First of all, the security component, you have to run it securely. Secondly, you have to dock all the data sources into these Excel AI agent. And thirdly, you have to take into account that these costs might actually balloon fairly fast in case you didn't manage to engineer it properly with maybe some guardrails or some cost-cutting engineering tactics. Shall I have another question before we jump into the AI agents?
And I do have something to add. So even Anthropic has said that please don't use our own system to make secure Excels. Like if you send us our data, we cannot promise that it'll be safe. We cannot promise you, well, we will store that data. Usually it might go outside Europe or outside your country of choice because it's just cheaper to host things sometimes in the US, sometimes somewhere else. But also, for the long-time listeners of the podcast, we've talked about Claude being able to think and reason for 30 hours. So just to do a bit of math, and I want to do the full calculations, it'll get a bit nerdy. But so if in 30 to 40 minutes, your Excel can cost basically the same as a Happy Meal in McDonald's, then if you put it to reason for 30 hours, and maybe it, I think at least after a few hours, it might fool itself. It might get into a loop where it tries to search for something, it puts in the Excel, then it tries to do the calculation, it's wrong, it searches again, and it gets in this loop of trying to fix the Excel because something is off. Even the environment might fail. And for 30 hours, it keeps trying to write an Excel. After 30 hours, you will not have the same cost as Happy Meal. You may have the same cost as buying the whole franchise. So maybe be safe out there, and if you're building a product out of this, include some safeguards, include some guardrails to keep these costs from ballooning. But back to you,
it's
Cyril.
generally speaking, a wise choice to have this under control anyway, especially if you're getting started, you're a builder, maybe don't have external capital or an AWS or Azure partnership yet that they're paying for your cloud costs. Certainly something you have to be fully aware of. Also, I've been creating more and more of these tutorials on N8N. There you also have to be careful because your API keys to Claude are getting exposed as well. Talking about AI agents or Versal V0s of the world, let's do a quick ranking show. What's the current setup for your agentic AI toolbox? What tools have you used lately, or are you really a power user, and which ones have you dropped? What's the current setup? Maybe I can then also plug mine current.
I was a very early adopter of GitHub Copilot. It started out as a smart-ish autocomplete. So you write a word, it tries to repeat the next word. I mean, my iPhone does that when I text someone. It was okay-ish, and I saw it grew, and I saw okay, it's still growing and it's still getting better. To the point where it's comparable to other agents. So other agents have shown up in the meantime. There's a lot of coding agents out there. Claude Code, I think, is, if not number one, at least in the podium for the best coding agents. Claude Code is a CLI tool, so it doesn't have a graphical window. You use everything in the terminal, which might not be the best if you're not super technical. But for someone like me, who's an engineer, it's just a perfect fit. And you can plug in more than just the Claude models. So you can use, and I've seen people using, you get Claude Code. It's a free tool. Instead of buying the subscription, that can be like $200 or even more dollars, depending on what model you choose, you can buy $100 of some tokens for some different model, so from a cheaper model, and you can run Claude Code running, for example, on Queen models or on GPT models. However, I think if you're running on GPT models, might as well pay for the Claude Code itself, because the Claude models are just a bit better. And so my top two contenders for the moment have been the Claude Code and GitHub Copilot. I know that there's Cursor and Windsurf. I think they try to be, or at least for me, they're a bit too much. But that's just my own personal opinion.
Okay. I mean, it's probably a particular aspect that's warping ongoingly. Currently, again, I dropped Replit and Lovable completely. I haven't used any of these tools lately. I'm fully on Versal V0. All the tutorials, maybe I can plug it once again on the screen, that I'm creating for prototypes, especially if you do enterprise grade software. Versal V0 seems to be the most adequate. You can deploy it very easily. And now they even have some backend integrations, like into Supabase, for example. And you can also very easily then integrate N8N workflows via an easy webhook. That's exactly something that we've been talking about on these tutorials. Just aside from that, I use probably every single day ChatGPT 5 for my writing tasks, for my research tasks. Claude, I use for engineering, I use for architecture, and so maybe some code generation just on the fly for neural networks for all the classes that I'm teaching. And the coding agent, Cursor. I'm a big fan of Cursor since the day it came out. Also, funny enough, Jensen yesterday, when we are now shifting into the topic of GTC, the conference they had was also saying each and every single developer at NVIDIA is using only one coding agent, and that is Cursor. He's very happily paying the license, apparently, so he was plugging that again on GTC. So each and every single NVIDIA engineer, NVIDIA researcher seems to be leveraging Cursor, which is a super unique, at least in my opinion, coding agent. You have the capabilities of run code very easily. On the right side, you have the coding agent that can basically just update also large code bases. So for me, the setup, once again, Versal V0, ChatGPT, Claude, and Cursor. I dropped everything else. This is my 4 best go-to AI agents. I've been also tinkering a little bit with ChatGPT Atlas, the browser. I'm using Comment here and there, but I'm not that big of a power user yet. Let's quickly wrap it up for the episode. Joao, GTC is basically the conference where NVIDIA is displaying all things technology, all things science, all things engineering. So my biggest takeaway are maybe these 2 elements, and maybe you also have 1 or 2 from your side, Joao. First is the integration of quantum processing units, or QPUs, and the integration of GPUs into that supercomputer. So the way that actually works is quantum computers are like super powerful, but one problem is basically these qubits are a little bit unstable. So we need to have an external engine for it to correct errors coming from the QPUs. And that's exactly these these QPUs to GPUs that basically NVIDIA unveiled yesterday, in the sense that we have these dual setups. We have a quantum computer and we have a classical accelerated GPU computer, and basically the GPU does the error correction of the qubits, and then the qubits itself are actually running the compute. So I thought that's an interesting way of maybe combining GPUs and QPUs. Also, there's an NVLink between the two for the communication. It's super fast, and I think it's computed in milliseconds for it to do the error correction and then flowing it back to the QPU. So that's a little bit around the quantum world. Offline, we talked multiple times about that. Joao, when are these quantum chips going into production? I think currently it's mostly a scientific world where we see players like IonQ, we have D-Wave, we have Rigetti Computing that are building the patents probably and the design of the supercomputers or the quantum computers. And then the large field, which is evolving also, is the control and observability of the quantum computers. And there's notable players. Again, I put it on the screen here. NVIDIA unveiled several partners, like, for example, Zurich Instruments in Switzerland that are running, for example, these control components on top of the quantum computer. So that's a little bit technical stuff that I was talking about here, but that's certainly something I'm eyeing a lot at. Also, Keysight is a technology that does observability. It's a company that is publicly listed. Everybody else that they were mentioning, I think from the controlling perspective, is a private company. That's my best takeaway. Also, the AI factories are underway. We need to have lots of compute to actually compute the tokens. Once again, key takeaways: AI factories are on the horizon. Vera Rubin, the new chip, is roughly coming actually next year into the data centers. That's also pretty exciting. And we have QPUs to GPUs communication. That is my best takeaway. What was your best takeaway? Joao, did you sell all your NVIDIA stocks or you're still bullish?
No, I have a very bullish approach. I mean, do I think it's hyperinflated or that there is some kind of bubble? There might. And I mean, we saw deals that were making
$5 trillion.
I mean, maybe not. There is certainly value in NVIDIA because they built over the years, over decades, a bit of a monopoly. I was doing machine learning engineering for a while, even before LLMs became a thing. And even I was forced to get an NVIDIA GPU because if you're doing any kind of deep neural networks, if you're training models, you had to have an NVIDIA GPU. Even most video editors or 3D modeling software, if using Blender, if using any kind of software for games, NVIDIA was still the most widely supported. So AMD had some support. AMD was the only competitor to NVIDIA, which is always not a great thing if you only have two guys. But NVIDIA was still like beating AMD in compatibility. It was beating AMD in having somewhat superior GPUs, but mostly for having more and more support. Everyone was writing CUDA, and CUDA is a proprietary technology from NVIDIA. And so I think they're reaping the benefits of something they built over decades. And also making use of people actually buying into the CUDA framework, because there is an equivalent open source framework where people could have written their software so that their 3D modeling software, that their video editors, that the games could run, and it would be independent of the brand. People liked CUDA better, and it was the standard, and it is still. So I think they're making use of being the number one. AMD also makes GPUs, but you haven't seen AMD nearly as close to the hype of AI and GPUs. I think they're still quite a good technology company. I think they have amazing CPUs. They just don't have equivalent GPUs from NVIDIA, and they don't have the market that NVIDIA does. I think there might be a correction in the future, but of course it will. It always does. It's like saying it will rain. I mean, eventually, of course. I'm not sure when, and I'm not good at guessing, so I'll just keep holding NVIDIA until the bubble bursts. And then I'll describe it and
for the time being.
One.
Maybe just, I just opened New York Times 7 minutes ago. The Fed cut the rate for the second time this year by a quarter point. I was just about to say that we haven't actually received the results, but it was just in. Maybe I can put it on the screen. Super hot news also for the entire stock market. NVIDIA reacted fairly positively. They're also having some earnings calls, generally speaking, around the tech sector, now that we are maybe shifting into the segment of the finance corner here in the podcast. But you were mentioning again AMD. There is this dynamic. Again, it's probably less about the chips and it's more about which company has the capability to build these very large, interconnected, super complex AI factories into the future. Most of the market is still betting that NVIDIA is more capable in doing that than AMD. But let's see. Currently, AMD is roughly 10% of the market cap of NVIDIA. So NVIDIA just reached $5 trillion. Again, I can put the news here on the screen. And I think AMD is sitting around $500 billion, depending on the day that you're checking the stock. So it's maybe also the split of the current GPU/AI factory market, 90% probably NVIDIA, 10% AMD, so that seems to be fairly correlated. Let's see into the future. I do have friends from the engineering world, they're super bullish on AMD, simply as an alternative, because most people do not like when they're stuck with one supplier only. So let's see for the future if AMD is able to catch up. Generally speaking, also for this week, now that we talked about the Fed interest rate cut by 0.25, is also an expected China deal actually happening. So that's a particular deal that many investors in the AI space, but also generally speaking, are actually awaiting. So that the trade tensions between China and the US hopefully is going to be eased with this particular deal. And then the third one, again, I mentioned it before, many of the companies are actually filing earnings this week. So it is a little bit of a hot week if you're into tech investing like we are for multiple years. So I'm always a bit shaking when there's as a week actually happening where you have earnings, plus a potential trade deal in the environment like we have today, plus the rate cuts that are here or not here. Yes, at least we got that just 10 minutes ago confirmed. So now it's just probably everybody's eyeing on this China deal and then also the earnings for the remainder of the week here and on the 29th of October, the day we are actually shooting the podcast episode. Again, looking ahead, we talked multiple times about that offline. Where are the new investing opportunities? We talked quantum. That's probably a market where it's going to be seen. Certainly an interesting component is the observability of qubits, generally speaking, like Zurich Instruments, this particular company, that's a private one yet. And other ones are, for example, high bandwidth memory. We talked multiple times about that. Micron being one of these companies, SK Hynix, the Korean one being the other, where probably with more reasoning, more agentic workflows, more Excel creation, you need more reasoning, you need more high bandwidth memory. That could be an interesting one as well. Any other elements from your side, Joao, for the finance corner, or you're just carefully awaiting all the news flowing in this week?
Carefully waiting and carefully holding all the stocks. People talk about a recession. I'm still yet to be seen. But there's clear value on AI. I mean, we talked about, and we have been naming this podcast, This is the Year. I think NVIDIA CEO Jensen, he named this is the AI century. So he's a bit even more ambitious than we are. I think next year will still be the year for AI. I mean, I'm not sure if I'll go as far as the whole century. We still have quite a few years to go. A whole array of opportunities, but you can see that there's clear value and there's clear goals that all the companies are trying to build something with these LLMs. Some are a bit too ambitious, some are a bit too hesitant. I think we will still see these new products coming out, and we'll see a bunch of different startups getting traction, getting acquired, going IPO. Because of this, the natural speed of development that these LLMs allow you to have. So it's a very exciting year for stocks, an even more exciting year for AI in general.
I think there is a vast array again of companies that are in the scope. Maybe I can just wrap the podcast off with the latest of the latest news regarding Microsoft and OpenAI. They seem to have reached an understanding that, again, Microsoft, once OpenAI will be this public benefit company in the US, will again still be able to hold a particular percentage of that public benefit company being OpenAI. And then the private or the non-profit company of OpenAI basically will just be doing the oversight of this public benefit company. The percentage they were rumoring around, let's see if that's the final number, is around 27%. Which is a little bit over 130 billion US dollars. If you consider OpenAI being maybe $1 trillion company very soon, again, Microsoft having turned 10 billion or 11 billion investments into 130 plus, that's a pretty moderate 13x gain, as in 300% return on investment by Microsoft into OpenAI. So that seems to be an interesting just dynamic these two companies still have. Once again, OpenAI and Microsoft are not leaving the path altogether. OpenAI probably still needs to use Azure, and Microsoft still wants OpenAI to use Azure as their compute services, but OpenAI now being able to also, for example, use AWS, being able to use Oracle, or maybe even grok in the future for some compute services. So that was it for the episode. João, thanks again for joining. We had talked about multiple things today. The key takeaway is please go watch our tutorials on these Versal v0 agents. We have some sort of more tutorials in the back burner. We'll try to do many more of these, just some understanding of how you actually generate business-grade software, having an agentic component, and then basically you can be selling and pitching these either to investors or to your first clients and then iterate around these products. That was it for the episode. Thanks again, João. See you in the next one next week, where we probably have a completely different array of news already to cover. Always excited to have you on the show, and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
See you next week.